Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world, and a very warm welcome to everyone on the line. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 13th webinar in our local and subnational government information series. And this is on the 4th of June, just one day before World Environment Day. And so a very warm welcome to everyone on the line. I want to just mention that these webinars are made possible with the support of the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework EU Support Project, and we are grateful for that support. The webinar is also brought to you on behalf of the Global Task Force, for which ICLEI is the focal point to the CBD, on behalf of the local and subnational governments therein. And I want to just quickly situate us in the schedule of events for the year. As I said, this webinar takes place monthly, and we are here, you can see highlighted the 4th of June, and you can see that our next webinar will be held on the 23rd of July. You can visit our dedicated platform to register for all of the webinars, and we encourage you to do so to keep up to date with the unfolding, very exciting process. So today, let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Timothy Blatch, and I am based in Cape Town, South Africa, in the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre that is housed in ICLEI's African Secretariat. And I will be your moderator for this session. And today we are going to look at some very exciting reflections on the journey that our local and subnational government constituency has been on. Since 2010, there's been a long history of advocacy, and we're really excited to have a really amazing panel with us today of people who've been around and in this space for many years. And we really hope to have an informal and open discussion today as we reflect on that history and start to piece together what are the essential things we need to take forward into the next decade. So before I move on, I just want to mention that this webinar will be recorded. The slides and the recording will be made available to you in a follow-up email once the webinar is done. And the webinar recording will also be made available on YouTube, on the ICLEI and Cities with Nature YouTube channels. So I want to just situate us on our timeline, our roadmap to COP15. As you can see, we are just where the little red star is. We are in the middle of the Edinburgh process for subnational governments, which is a virtual consultation. And I will have an announcement on this in a second, but I want to just draw our attention to the SABSTA and SBI meetings at the bottom. This is one change since our last webinar. We've had an official announcement that these meetings will be postponed. We're waiting on the exact dates and the exact modes of delivery, but it's likely that these will take place around October. So I want to just quickly run through today's agenda. I'm going to give a little update on the Edinburgh process. I'm then going to hand over to Kobi, who's from ICLEI CBC as well, our global director and the regional director of ICLEI Africa. And Kobi will present an overview of a very exciting document that we have recently prepared. I will then play a pre-recording of one of our panelists who's unable to be live with us today, and I will introduce our panelists in the coming slides. But then we really want to focus on point number 5, where you can see we're going to have an open and informal discussion today with the panelists who are live online. Before I play a pre-recording of Oliver, who is no stranger to this webinar series. Thereafter, we'll open the floor for some questions and discussion, time permitting, whereby you can ask your questions either by raising your hand in the panel on the right and we can unmute you, or by making use of the chat box, which you are welcome to do throughout the webinar. So it's really my pleasure to welcome our panelists for today. I've been really excited in preparing for this webinar. I think there's, between the panelists you can see on the screen, there are years and years of history and stories to be told. and we hope to dive into that and hear a little bit more about their personal reflections and about the history of our constituency in the CBD. So first up, we have Kobie Brandt, I've already mentioned, and she's also no stranger to this series. Kobie is the Regional Director of ICLEI Africa and the Global Director of ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre, and it's wonderful to have her join us today. We are also joined live today by Suzanne Nolden, and Suzanne is based in the city of Bonn in the Department of International Affairs and Global Sustainability. And Suzanne has walked this road with us and with the constituency for many years, dating back to about 2007, which will be the starting point of our discussion today. So Suzanne, a warm welcome to you, and we are so thrilled to have you on the line with us. The next two panelists are unable to join us live this morning. As I mentioned, we have pre-recordings of their thoughts and reflections, which I will play in this webinar. But we encourage you to join us this afternoon at 3 p.m. South African Standard Time, where all four of our panelists will be live. So the pre-recordings for today, we have first up Mr. Oliver Hillel from the SCBD, who has presented in many of these webinars, and we're always grateful for his interventions. And very excitingly, we have Mr. Grant Pearsall as well. Grant has recently retired from a career-long history in the city of Edmonton, where he was director of the city's planning and leadership team. So again, a face that has been in the space for many years, and we are so looking forward to hearing Grant's reflections as well. So before I introduce or hand over to Kobie, I just want to quickly alert us to the fact that the Edinburgh process, which we've presented on a few times, is well underway, and the online consultation was originally scheduled to close on the 29th of May. However, I just want to bring your attention to the fact that this online consultation has now been extended until the 12th of June. So for all those who have not yet made inputs to the consultation documents, we encourage you to please visit Attendify. There's an inquiries email here for those who have not registered and would like to. There is very much still time to do so, and we encourage you to make your inputs on the Google Forms that you will find there. It's exciting that we have an extension, as this gives us a chance to consult more broadly. So without further ado, I want to hand over briefly to Kobie. Before we start our informal discussion, I just wanted for Kobie to run through a few slides and to give us, set the tone for the webinar and introduce a very exciting document. So Kobie, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Unmute. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Timothy. So what a wonderful pleasure it is to be joined by our colleagues here. And Suzanne is more than a colleague. She's become a very dear friend and a real champion for the cause of local biodiversity across the world for many years. And so has Grant, and of course Oliver Hill as well. So I'm delighted to be joined by these panelists today. Yes, this overview document, which we're releasing the May version of, is really capturing what's happened before and since the adoption of the decision 1011, which was adopted in Nagoya in Japan. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that. But in essence, it is the first document of its kind that's capturing the history and the road that we've been on since the very first steps that were taken in an organized way, where cities in an organized way decided to work together on the theme of biodiversity and nature in cities. So if you'd like, Timothy, I can tell you a little bit more about the start of that journey, or I could go more into this document.
I think, Kobie, it would be great if you could just briefly take us through what the document, what's in the document, and then we can get going on the discussion.
All right. Okay. So yes, this slide basically summarizes a lot of what's in the document. So we've put it down into sections. As I said, there was a history building up to this historic decision 1022, which is also known by us in the biodiversity world at local government level as the Plan of Action. This was historic for many reasons. At the UN level, it was the first multi-level UN agreement that actually had a dedicated decision on cities and or local and subnational governments. The parties of the CBD, of the Convention on Biological Diversity, of course, all agreed that they wanted this specific decision focused on local and subnational governments, and led the way, and in a way paved the way so many others uh, that would follow, so many other multi-level governance frameworks, initiatives, etc. We see that the Ramsar Convention even has a dedicated cities agenda as well now, and many others. And we know how we are making progress in the climate space, in the desertification space, the SDGs. There's even a dedicated SDG on cities, etc. These are all things that came after this decision. So in many ways, this also pioneered action across the board in the United Nations and in the decision-making processes of the parties collectively. But for us at local and subnational government level, it gave us a bedrock really on which to build and on which to hang our initiatives, and it also enabled us to work in an elevated way with our national partners in terms of how we can actually move forward together in a multilateral way. So section 2 speaks about that leading up to the decision, and then section 3 really captures a very large variety and rich variety of amazing initiatives that took place from all over the world, from partners, from cities, from national governments, parties of the convention, organizations like ICLEI, our partner organizations like IUCN, etc. And yes, this is the first time that this is being captured in a document of this kind, because the history is important and we can learn a lot from history by looking back at what we've already done, so that we do not reinvent the wheel, and that we can anew be inspired about what's already been done and committed to and build on that. And then section 4 basically makes some recommendations of how we need to move forward, what this document has taught us, where are the fantastic achievements to build on, where are the partnerships to be strengthened, where's the progress and the innovation that needs to be elevated, and where are the gaps, where do we still need to take action. Annex 1 is a list. It's non-exhaustive because it's impossible to capture everything, but it's a list of some of the major achievements that we see that has happened over the last and shaped the world over the last 10, 15 years. So we're very excited about releasing this document. This version is, of course, going to be, it's called the May version, and it is inviting organizations now to come forward with further ideas and initiatives which we may have missed, for us to consider incorporating into a final version, which will be handed to the United Nations, to the Convention on Biological Diversity at their SABSTA, which is now scheduled for October. And why has the overview document been developed? I think basically it says it here in the text, but it's very, very important for us to understand how far we've come and what the decision has actually enabled us to do, what that dedicated decision, the plan of action, has allowed us and allowed the world to embrace and do together, mobilize resources, mobilize partnerships, and tremendous achievements that sprang from it, which many of us, certainly all of us on this call, I know are holding very dear to our hearts.
Great, thank you so much, Kobie. And I think you've done a fantastic job of setting the scene. And I want to pick up on one thing you said specifically. You know, it's really important to reflect on how far we've come. And that's really the purpose of this webinar is, you know, we're joined by an amazing panel who have walked this road since the beginning. You know, as we prepare this document and prepare to launch it, we really want to take this moment to reflect on the past, from where we've come from, and the many achievements that our constituency has achieved over the last probably 14 years or so. So with that, I want to dive into our panelists. I want to introduce Grant Pearsall. I've already said he's just recently retired from the city of Edmonton. And Edmonton has been a leading city in shaping the space and has walked the road with ICLEI and partners for many years. And as I said, Grant was not able to join us live today, this morning. It's the middle of the night for him, but he will be joining us live this afternoon. But for now, I'd like to just play an intervention that Grant kindly pre-recorded for us. So. Okay. Hi, Grant, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you with us, and we are really looking forward to picking your brain and hearing a little bit more about your reflections and experiences. So, you know, I wanted to, for a second, take us back to the sort of 2006 to 2010 period, where LAB was being conceptualized and LAB was then underway. And where local governments were, you know, less so on the radar of the CBD than they are now. And at the time, you were leading Edmonton's biodiversity strategy. And so I just wanted to hear from you if you would tell us a little bit about Edmonton's participation in the LAB project as a pioneer city. Yeah, how was that experience? And tell us a bit of the history and your reflections.
Very good, thanks, Tim. It's been a pleasure to be part of LAB in the early days. When we started on our biodiversity program at the city of Edmonton, it was around 2002, was the incipient years, and we started working on and getting a little bit stronger and figuring out what we were going to do with biodiversity in our city. Although we had a long history, we were growing rapid, a long history of, you know, working with biodiversity, maybe not in that nomenclature, but we had protected a lot of river valley land. And we were very concerned, though, that we couldn't protect it on what we call the tablelands, the flat part above the ravines in the river valley and so forth. So we were trying to sort that out and figure out what we could do. And not too long after that, we got a note from LAB saying it was starting up and wanted to know if we wanted to join. Now, it had sort of rattled around in our organization with waste management. So that's how LAB found us, through waste management in our city. And they said, I don't think this is us. Passed it over to us. And then we started, and it was really great because as we were starting, we didn't know what we were good at, what we were poor at, what we could improve at. Does anybody even care about this? There was a thinking or thought at the time that there was lots of cities that cared about this, and it'd be great if we could get connected. So fortunately, we had a mayor that got elected, Mayor Mandel, and his message to all administration was, I really want you to get out in the world and see what's going on and bring some of that knowledge back. So when LAB approached us, it was like perfect timing and the perfect sort of venue for us to go and see what was going on in the world. So we really enjoyed that. And from that, we got to go to some of the meetings and got to share our work, see some other work, and so on. And you start to think, is our city like anybody else's city in the world? And in many ways, cities are all different, yet they're also very much the same. Just something I'd like to share. One of our very first meetings, there was a presentation from Walvis Bay, Namibia, and I thought, why would that be even close to what I'm doing or what we are doing in it? Well, he gave his presentation, and at the end I thought I could have given that presentation without even talking to him. Like, it was so close to our situation. So even though, you know, we have different cultures, different nationalities, different people from all over the world, I think that's one of the things I learned early on, that deep down cities are pretty much the same, but they're embedded in a different sort of context, you know, socially, economically, geographically. And so that was a very good start for us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And, you know, thinking back to those earlier days, and if we now start to look at the sort of 2010 to 2020 decade, you know, how has Edmonton strengthened its commitment to protecting biodiversity over that time period? Obviously, we had the Plan of Action in place from 2010, and how did that sort of guide and enable the work of Edmonton up until this year?
Yes, that was a very fruitful period for the city of Edmonton, particularly when it comes to biodiversity, but in many areas we were very sort of outward-looking, progressive period for us, and there was a lot of good change that happened. And one of the things, you know, that we had been working on up to 2007, like this was prior to LBSAPs, we had done our own conservation plan. That's a bit of a more North American terminology, but yet at its heart, it was very similar. And by getting that work done, we thought it was, you know, it was well received by the community, well received by city council. We thought that was pretty good, but it sure wasn't enough. It was something that we had to do, but it wasn't sufficient for us to really do what needed to be done to protect biodiversity in our city. So over time, we started to just look at what's going on in the highest level plans. And for people out there, I'm an urban planner by profession, and I was working in the strategy group. And it was like, what is our biodiversity strategy at the highest levels? So that's when we started to work embedding policy in every kind of strategic plan and moving it up to the very top of the hierarchy of our strategic planning system. And that started to work out a lot better. And then I started to get this real understanding that biodiversity isn't in your official plan and right front and center. People start forgetting about biodiversity if they don't deal with it every day. So we started changing our policies, which led to other changes, which led to better projects, led to more money coming towards the biodiversity file. And through those 10 years, we got actually quite strong. So I was starting to finish up my career with the city of Edmonton, starting at the end of the decade. And we were starting a new official plan. And I still had the option that I could sort of push to say, I want to keep everything we've done in the last 10 years going into the next plan, because I was really kind of concerned that if it didn't move to another generation of our official plans, it might have just been sort of a temporal kind of thing that our city did, and it was good, and then we moved on. But so I took a little bit of a back seat as a practical or strategic move. And the people that were working on the plan and the people that supported the plan, which is just about to be released, really took it on to make sure that the ideas that had been developed over the past 10 years are now going to go forward into the next 10 years. So that was really something gratifying, and I think that it'll be very good for our city. So we'll get stronger as time goes on, and we've got another decade or 20 years that we'll be working on this in new ways.
Yeah, fantastic. That's amazing to hear that evolution of the plan, and how, you know, you've really as a city managed to embed it in these broader strategic plans. So I want us to, for a moment, to now look to the future. You've already started to touch on it, but in terms of your reflections, you know, what are some of the critical lessons that you've learned or takeaways you would want people on this webinar to leave with in terms of how it will be critical to strengthen the contributions and the role of local governments and subnational governments in implementing the post-2020 framework in the coming decade. So, based on all your experience, what are the things we really critically need to focus on going forward?
There's quite a bit, but I'll take a stab at this. One of the things that I've noticed is we need to do more work everywhere to connect the various disciplines to get a common understanding of how we can make progress in this field. And every time where we have reached out to an engineer or a landscape architect or someone in our social services, I think we get stronger that way. So that's a big part of it, because not all disciplines have had any education in this area. Even though they might have, advanced degrees, their knowledge of biodiversity might be something that they haven't picked up. So there's a role, there's a role to educate folks. The other part, I started to realize, and I really feel strongly about this, if you are not into the data stream or in the data function of your city, I think the biodiversity function is going to sort of cease to exist in a way, because we're moving to so much into data and analytics, and we made some really big moves just at the end of 2019 to get all of our ecological mapping done for the city. We're seeing great progress or great usage of this data that's helping us keep up, because the pace of decisions in our jurisdiction are going faster and faster. There's an expectation that we have to make decisions when the decisions need to be made. Biodiversity tends to hold back and say, I need more time to figure this out. I need to get in the field. So we started to shift our organization so that we would be ready when these kind of questions came and we could have some understanding. Because if you don't, everything just moves on. The other part that we're getting a lot of good traction on going into the future is when we reconceptualize, and I didn't mention this in the last question, but we reconceptualize how we do our planning in terms of ecological networks. And we picked ecological networks. We could have put other kind of organizational structures, but we went with the ecological network because we have transportation networks and and drainage networks, and all three of them interact in positive, neutral, or negative ways. Once we started to make that shift, it was much easier for people to communicate with each other, because you might not know the other person's knowledge and education, but a lot of people know what systems are, what networks are, and what that means. So it gave us a platform that we could communicate with. I will give one more example too, is we've been working hard to bring the parks and the biodiversity functions together. Now, at first I thought, that's pretty odd. Is it just our city that it seems a hard fit? I had one person tell me there will be no ecology in our park system. So that just is, it's one comment. It's not like the whole parks department. And I was a director in that area, in the strategic planning area. But it does show you there is this uneasiness about the two ways of looking at the world. That's in my opinion. And so we worked to bring this together in one new plan. It's called Breathe Edmonton's Green Network Strategy. And it brings together all of those ideas from ecology, traditional parks, to social gatherings into one plan. And again, that's part of the philosophy of moving it up so it's relevant for more players than just people that care about biodiversity. And we're starting to see some results about that. And I'm hoping that this maybe has unlocked another avenue for us to get better at what we do.
For sure. Fantastic. So Grant, thank you so much for joining us and for being with us today. And we really appreciate your inputs and your reflections. Great. So with that, I think that's also helped to set the stage. It's wonderful to hear the experience of Edmonton. And now I want to dive straight into our discussion. And we're in discussion live with Kobie and with Suzanne. You know, Grant started where it all began. So, you know, I want to take us back now to the year 2006, where the lab project was on the horizon. That's local action for biodiversity. And thinking back to this planning phase, I want to ask Kobie, you know, Kobie, what was the thinking and the sort of partnership philosophy behind the lab project? And how was this significant in shaping local and subnational involvement in the biodiversity agenda leading up to COP10 in Nagoya and the decision 1022?
Thank you, Tim. Well, I can honestly say that a lab was not ICLEI's idea, or at least the ICLEI Secretariat's idea. It came from our cities, and I think this also testifies as to what ICLEI is. ICLEI was formed years ago, almost 30 years ago now to the date, by cities and for cities who wanted to connect and get together and move forward on the agenda of sustainability. And exactly the same thing happened with Lab. There were 3 cities, Durban, eThekwini, here in South Africa, Edmonton, and we saw Grant speaking with us now, and Cape Town, the city of Cape Town, came together in 2006 and actually approached ICLEI to say, can you, in partnership with our friends at IUCN, work out a program that can connect us together as cities? And of course, at that stage, ICLEI didn't have a formal agenda on biodiversity and nature. It was infiltrated in some of our other agendas, but many of our over 1,000 cities at that stage were already doing wonderful things with nature in their cities. And yes, the ICLEI leadership immediately decided this is something that the world needs now, and this is how Local Action for Biodiversity, or LAB, was formed. So these 3 cities were instrumental to bring on board not only another 21 pioneers very quickly with us, but also in shaping what LAB would be. And essentially, LAB is a step process where a city first assesses what the biodiversity is it has on the ground, and then how to better manage it and how to improve it and how to plan your city with nature as you grow as a city or as you move forward in managing your city, if it's a very well-developed city. So LAB was, from the very start, a type of process flow which would track a city's progress around the steps that it would take with nature. And it was working for cities here in Africa who have maybe a lot less advanced systems at that point in time, but it was also working for the Edmontons, the Curitibas, the Bonds, the very advanced cities of the world. And it was very rewarding to see that the 21 pioneers soon grew to over 50 cities. And LAB is a legacy that I think in all the cities that really shaped and gave them a bedrock on which to build their biodiversity work. But one last point I want to make is it was also a very important project for us, because we in ICLEI were able to partner with new partners like IUCN and many others, but we were also able to establish out of LAB a center of excellence called the Cities Biodiversity Center. And till today, the Cities Biodiversity Center is ICLEI's center of excellence on biodiversity, which serves as a central entry point to our very many partners and cities around the world, where they can come and learn and share and connect around biodiversity and nature. So LAB gave birth to so much more than just a single resource for cities. It gave birth to what we see today, and a bit later I think you'll also mention the new generation lab, which is called Cities with Nature. It all started with lab in 2006. And yes, from that, we were able to motivate our community, our constituency, but also the parties to all rally behind the decision that was adopted in Nagoya, the plan of action in 2010.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kobe, for, that's a really important and critical part of the history of all of this work. And Suzanne, I'm mindful of the fact that, you've walked this journey with ICLEI for many years, right from the days of lab. And I want to turn to you for a second. Please share with us some of your recollections of the global partnership, specifically around sort of COP9 in Bonn and the very first summit, if we can call it that, or the Mayor's Conference on Local Action for Biodiversity. Over to you.
Thank you, Timothy. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I hope my sound is good, because I had some issues in the beginning. So it was fascinating to listen to the memories, in particular from Grant, because I know him from the first days. It was really a deep dive for us. Bonn was the designated host of COP9. So I personally had my first encounter with biodiversity in 2006. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a green space manager. I'm an international officer. So I first learned that everything I knew under nature protection was biodiversity. Then I entered the lab project and the exchange with other cities, and that was really a pioneer thing. We embarked together on this journey, and it was all about people at that time. We had these great people driving us. When we're talking about Durban, we're talking about Dr. Deborah Roberts, who you all know not only as an expert for biodiversity, but also as IPCC leadership in the climate context. And there were so many others. We had telephone conferences once a month where really leadership gathered together to develop strategies, and we all moved towards COP9, which happened in Bonn in May 2008. The city was setting up, together with ICLEI and Engagement Global, a mayor's summit on local action for biodiversity. The representation was merely leadership in that summit, and so we gathered together to work on the Bonn call for local action for biodiversity. And we really had drafting and editing sessions with 3 or 4 mayors present. And the doors were wide open, both by the CBD Secretariat, the incredible support, people again by Oliver, and by the German presidency at the time, Sigmar Gabriel and his team. And they opened the high-level segment to us. We had a side event, we did an exhibition beforehand, in this incredible first time multi-level partnership. We had nations in there, we had international organizations in there, we had UN entities in there, and the call for action was issued by 4 mayors of 4 continents in the high-level segments. That was the entry door, actually, and led to Decision 928 on reporting on biodiversity. But in the Bonn call for action, everything was already in. It was about multi-level action. It was about mainstreaming. It was about the links between the different fields of action. It was about global partnerships. And soon after, the Global Partnership on Local and Subnational Action for Biodiversity was officially launched at the IUCN World Congress in Barcelona that same autumn. So really the events were so quick, and it were exciting times. Just ask back, Timothy, if I should highlight something else in particular.
Thanks, Suzanne. That's a really great, piece of history, and it's awesome to see the role that Bonn played in that COP9. I'm mindful of the time, so I want us to move on to the next time period now and reflect on the last decade. So, Kobe introduced in the slides earlier that in 2010 we had the landmark victory of the plan of action at COP10. And Kobe, if I turn to you, thinking back, did you ever think we would be standing here today, a decade from this pivotal moment? And how has the plan of action and decision 1022 set the scene for the advocacy agenda that's followed in the last decade?
Timothy, to be honest with you, yes, I knew we would be standing here, and I knew in my heart that this agenda, once we embarked on it, was not going to stop. It was only going to grow, because it makes so much sense to live your life in a city with nature, to actually plan those city leaders who plan and shape our cities, to plan and build cities with nature in mind, bringing nature in close contact with everybody. Everything we do actually relates back to nature, from the food we eat to our spiritual and mental and cultural well-being. All of these things depend on us living in living in close proximity with, shall I say, and respecting nature that's all around us. So yes, I absolutely knew that when we started and embarked on Lab and the very first urban nature forums, which were held in Cape Town, then in Edmonton, all very much inspired by a meeting in Curitiba in 2007, incredible leadership shown by Mayor Risha at that time, who went on to become Governor Risha from the state of Paraná in Brazil, from the leadership then from Bonn. As Susanna so eloquently explained now, we moved on to Hyderabad from there. Everywhere we went with the COPs, cities and regions were right there with the parties next to them, having an advocacy roadmap that reminded national governments all along that whatever they decide, whatever decisions they make at these COPs that shape us, our world at global level, actually do need to be implemented at the local level. And so our cities and our regions need to be part of the decisions that are taken there, as real spheres of government, independent but very complementary to national governments. And that's also where the idea of multi-level governance got traction, both in the climate space as well as in the biodiversity space. And we now see that in all the Rio conventions, for instance, multi-level governance, and in the SDGs, etc., multi-level governance is the way to go. Even as we're addressing COVID right now across the world, this pandemic that we are all standing up against, this pandemic is also best addressed in those cities and regions and national governments where they work closely together. So I knew that we would go from strength to strength. The biodiversity agenda, cities need to plan and shape themselves with nature. There are just too many benefits to do it, and too many dire consequences not to do it. So yes, absolutely. And I think we must go further, farther and faster. And the only way to do that is to do it together. That's why we've had so many extra partners who have come along our journey over the last 10, 15 years.
Amazing, Kobe. It's great to hear that. And as you say, strength to strength, as the momentum has really built over the last decade. So Suzanne, over to you. As you reflect on the decade, what are some of the, your key reflections and lessons? Specifically, I know you were involved integrally in the city summits, in the sidelines of COP. And you also have a strong connection. Kobe touched on the climate agenda as well. If you could also, just reflect on how the linkages between biodiversity and climate have evolved over the decade.
Thank you, Timothy. I'd actually like to expand this. As you all know, our mayor, Ashok Sridharan, is currently the president of FICLE for 2018 to 2021. So I'm quite aware of the interlinkages between the SDGs. I don't think we can think of the SDGs and of biodiversity and climate as just two cubes in that SDG pattern. It's all multidimensional, And it's more like cooking. When you fail adding one spice, you might spoil the whole dish. So what was very important for me within the process of the past years is that regions and cities teamed up much closer in the process, that leaders got personally involved, like a commissioner of Hyderabad traveling to Germany to a global partnership workshop. The declarations and decisions really stepped up and always mainstreamed biodiversity. Nature-based solutions became something tangible, not seen in the cities with nature as well, not only for health or for recreation or for floodwater protection, but for all of it as real ecosystem services. For me, it is very important to see the involvement of science growing, as Grant mentioned, and to see the approach towards universal agreements shown by the climate agreement in Paris. And I think the biodiversity debate is going into the same directions of having an agreement that is more and more also stakeholder oriented, subnational, local oriented. And I think the post 2020 biodiversity framework is a tremendous opportunity to go into this direction, and the new plan of action will reflect this as well.
Absolutely. Great, thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to stick with you for a second, and in the interest of time, I'm going to combine the next question with your sort of closing remarks and takeaways. And you know, you've rightfully mentioned how critical the post-2020 framework is, and I just wanted to get, you know, any thoughts from you on what needs to be done from a local government perspective in the coming decade. You know, learning from the lessons of the previous one, what do we need to take forward in the post-2020 era?
First of all, the multidimensional aspect. When you work in a local government on biodiversity, the conditions are very different. And in densely populated regions, for example, you always have the dimension of settlement pressure. So you might think of upgrading biodiversity, giving additional values to it. That was actually a debate we had with ICLEI, with ICLEI Europe and the German government and some other stakeholders in 2 or 3 workshops this year. So really, territorial approach is important, but upgrading is also important. Thinking connected, thinking from problem to solution, to financing, to enabling, to policy making, to education. Always think everything with you, and think data and management systems. As Grant mentioned, science is inseparable. We need the data which are collected locally to react globally. And my final thing would be a quote, which I would like to read to you. It is connected to the pandemic as well, but I think it is just a good thing. We can, however, create a new normal with the kind of transformative changes that will enable us to reclaim our relationship with land, biodiversity, and the climate system. Whatever choices we make, we're building back better, stronger, and smarter means embarking on a journey where we create the conditions for nature to take care of us, a new social contract for nature. This was by Elizabeth Mrema, Ibrahim Cha, and Patricia Espinosa in a joint editorial in The Guardian. And I'd like to close with that because it's just amazing. And I'd like to invite everybody to follow up the debate in the Daring Cities Conference to happen in October as a virtual event. And a last invitation is tomorrow, World Environment Day. It's also Pastoral Day. We're celebrating Beethoven's birthday, and we have invited artists and musicians all over the world to contribute to a project around the Pastoral Symphony and the connection with land, nature, and climate. And tomorrow there will be a live stream on pastoralproject.org. So please join in the afternoon, 5 o'clock German time.
Thank you, Suzanne. for everyone listening, we actually have some slides on the Daring Cities and the pastoral project, and you will receive this presentation after the webinar with those links as well as the links to the document of the achievements. So Kubi, I'd like to turn to you as we close the discussion. You know, if we look to the future, what are you hoping to see happen at COP15 and beyond that in the next decade? Based on your reflections, you know, what do we need to do from an advocacy point of view going forward?
Timothy, the plan of action, and in the document that we spoke of at the beginning of this webinar, you can see how much innovation was sparked by the plan of action. The plan of action is coming to an end in 2020. So we need desperately for the world to actually adopt another new dedicated decision for cities and regions, for all levels of subnational governments, recognizing the pivotal role that they can and should be playing in implementing the global biodiversity, post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So that new decision is absolutely pivotal, and we need to build on everything that has been started and that has proven to work. So one key initiative that I would like to see growing, for instance, is the Cities with Nature and Regions with Nature platform. This platform enables cities to connect, share, learn, etc., but also to make their commitments and track their progress around how they are mainstreaming nature into all aspects of urban life and planning at the city and at the regional government level. So I'd like to see that, but most of all, we need that decision from COP15, a dedicated decision, again, which will provide us with that framework which the plan of action did, which is now coming to an end. So maybe it's a new plan of action, or maybe that plan of action is part and embedded into a new dedicated decision. Apart from that, we'd also like to see that cities and the local level is mainstreamed throughout the decisions that are taken at COP15. We need to act for nature, and we need to act now. And we cannot address climate change or any of the other global issues, the development issues that the world is struggling with at the moment, if we do not go back to our roots, and that is meaning back to nature, respect nature, live with nature, plan with nature, and yes, enjoy nature as well, all around us. We are, after all, part of nature.
Absolutely. What a wonderful note to leave us on, Kubi. Just to let everyone know that we will make a timeline available in the slides to you. And I'm mindful that we are running out of time. If you bear with us just for a few moments, I want to play some reflections from Oliver before we close the webinar. And Oliver will be reflecting on similar topics that our panel has done.
Hello to all of you. My name is Oliver Hillel, and I'd like to share with you some personal reflections on the process that has been happening over the last 14 years for the engagement and the contribution of subnational government, cities, and other local authorities in the work of the convention. If I look back, it's been a long and extremely fruitful process. I am very proud to see the number of pages that it takes today to describe the amount of achievements that have been coming with this. I do remember personally the process leading up to the first Curitiba meeting of cities and biodiversity, 1 year precisely after the 8th conference of the parties in Brazil. I was not in the conference itself, but I certainly was there 1 year later when the then mayor, later governor of Curitiba, Beto Richa, responded to the idea that mayors, by hosting conferences, had learned a lot on biodiversity and would like to share their own contributions to the process. This led to, also because of the Local Action for Biodiversity project that ICLE was already leading at that time, this led to a whole mobilization that actually never stopped. At COP9, there was a first decision. At COP10, there was already the plan of action. And I remember the thought I'd like to leave with you is that all the resistances that parties had at that time to adopt a specific instrument to engage subnational government, cities, and other local authorities turned out to be absolutely no problem and did not have any negative connotation or consequence in terms of the articulation of policies or even the cost of the engagement of those authorities. It was found indeed that the largest amount of funds that are invested on biodiversity are probably invested at local and subnational level anyway. So this led to a very steep mobilization of what is now called the global partnership. And we can only see that I would like to challenge you to say that I don't think there is any other multilateral environmental agreement where a global partnership has been established at this level of organization for so many years, and where actual international law is being developed in cooperation with the mobilization of those actors. So I think this is quite unique as an achievement. We've been very privileged to see the science backing us. You know, there is really more than 60% of the parties now are submitting their reports and their biodiversity strategies already with a inclusion of the contribution, and this is bound to grow. Basically, the point is that none of the parties that we in the Secretariat today talk to do not have the engagement of subnational and local governments. Every one of them talks about that. And I'm very happy also to say that subnational and local constituents have been in the transversal approach that we have been developing in the Secretariat, ranging from restoration, ecological restoration, to resource mobilization, to capacity building. The great projects, Una Rivers and IKI Interact Bio, have generated a lot of capacity for building the capacity of local and subnational governments to cooperate with national governments. We have guidelines on that. I'm also very glad to report that the impacts of that process have gone well beyond the CPD. We already have an SDG specifically on cities, but all of them are linked to urban-rural linkages. We have very strong words for nature in the Habitat 3 conference. We have presence in climate, in desertification, in the Wetlands Convention, and as we know, in the Man and Biosphere Program and the World Heritage Sites, local and subnational governments play a tremendous role. And I'd like to conclude by saying that the celebration of World Environment Day 2020, where the Mayor of Montreal is leading the celebrations for North America, and the excellence of that process that now brings every voice of subnational and local action to the official global biodiversity framework that the parties are designing for the post-2020 process, that is called the Edinburgh process, that is led by the government of Scotland, with ITLE, with Regions 4, with a group of leading subnational governments, the EU Committee of Regions, and so many other players. This is really the coming of age for this convention that can show that if the goal is to reach an ecological civilization, then local and subnational governments need to be part of that.
Great. Thank you so much to Oliver. We always are so grateful for his inputs. I know we are running out of time, and it will unfortunately not leave us much time for questions. But we will make sure that we respond to all of the questions following the webinar, and we distribute the answers. Kubi touched on Cities with Nature. I just want to take a moment to highlight some of the achievements on World Biodiversity Day. For example, our monthly Cities with Nature Buzz comes out every month, and we encourage you to check that out. Our network of partners, as you can see on the left, is growing as we co-shape this shared platform. And I'm really excited to announce that we now have, as you can see on the right, 155 cities and regions who have joined from 54 countries around the world. And this number is growing every single day. So for all those on the call who have not checked Cities with Nature out, we encourage you to do so. Just quickly to mention, our next webinar will take place on the 23rd of July. So please register for that and the details will be sent to you. Join us tomorrow on World Environment Day for City Resilience Stories, a webinar that will focus on the African context. And you can find details about this on the website, on the ICLEI website. And as Suzanne mentioned earlier, we will distribute this presentation with information about the Daring Cities online conference now that will take place in October, as well as the Beethoven Pastoral. Suzanne did a really good job of speaking about this, and this virtual event will take place tomorrow as part of World Environment Day. So we encourage you to check that out. We don't have much time for questions and discussions. I wonder if there is, one very urgent question that needs to be answered now. Please feel free to put up your hand. Otherwise, we will ensure that the panelists respond to the questions in the chat box after the webinar. I'll just give a few moments in case there is any burning. And just to let everyone on the webinar know that we will, we're proud to announce that we will send a copy of the achievements document to all those who have registered for the webinar in the follow-up email. So on that note, I just want to thank everybody for your attendance and for being with us today. It's always a pleasure for us to gather and be able to hold these webinars and these sessions. I want to specifically thank our panelists and especially those two who were live with us, Suzanne and Kubi. Thank you for joining us, for your time, for your reflections, for your stories. It's incredible to hear about the evolution and the history of the important advocacy work that we are all involved in, and set that historical foundation for what the exciting things that are to come in the lead up to and and even far beyond COP15. So with that, I want to close the webinar and encourage you to join us later today in the second session, where all four of our panelists will be live and in discussion, and we're really excited for that. So thank you to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you either later today or next time.
Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Suzanne. Goodbye. Thank you.